So Zelensky is still working on trying to get Tomahawk missiles. I don't know if it'll be successful, but he's talking about it with not President Trump, but someone else, and we'll see how this all plays out. Let's talk about this in just a moment. Before we do, let's kind of recap of what's happened today. So Zelensky was meeting with European leaders with the 19th sanctions package. I talked about that in my last video just a couple hours ago, and the EU has officially adopted this 19th package of sanctions, and it looks like those sanctions are useful, meaningful. They're not everything, but they're moving the right direction. He said today in Brussels, I met with Prime Minister of Finland and thanked him for recently announcing a 30th defense package worth 52 million euros and Finland's accession to the Pearl Initiative with a contribution of 100 million. Okay, so even Spain is joining the Pearl Initiative to buy U.S. weapons for Ukraine. He called it a NATO initiative. The spokesperson from Spain called it a NATO initiative, reaffirmed Spain's commitment to Ukraine and to the alliance. Now, there's a little bit of fracturing here. The Belgian Prime Minister is saying we won't be the only ones paying Putin. So Bart de Wever has threatened to block the EU's plan to use 162 billion in frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. He said even during World War II, frozen assets were never touched. If we take Putin's money, he'll take ours. I think that's the way it's going to play out. When those frozen Russian assets are seized by the West, Putin's going to turn around and seize all the assets, nationalize all the assets of Western companies that are still in Russia, and that's how he'll fund the next phase. So they'll get some, Ukraine will get that money, and it'll come from the oligarchs, and then Putin will get money from Western companies, and I think that's what's going to happen. Belgium's conditions are share all legal risks among EU countries. If the money must be returned, every member state should contribute, use frozen assets, not only in Belgium, but across the EU. He doesn't want, like, nobody wants to be the one holding the bag or being just the bad guy. And Russia is able to point out, oh, President Trump's the bad guy. No, it's going to be the head in Belgium. No, it's going to be Merz. Nobody wants to do that. Okay. Sweden's defense minister says that frozen Russian assets worth 7.35 billion could be used to fund Ukraine's potential purchase of 100 to 150 Gripen fighter jets. Now, those Gripens aren't going to arrive anytime soon. Maybe within the next year, those Gripens will start to land in Ukraine. And this is over the next decade that there's going to be 100 to 150. If finalized, Russia would end up financing Sweden's biggest fighter export straight to Ukraine. But again, that depends on if they can use these frozen Russian assets. The U.S. Treasury has just imposed these sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil. I talked about that again in that last video, so you can go back to that. I'm not going to add to that. I'm going to keep moving. So Trump is on the heels of that saying this last night, we canceled the meeting with President Putin. It didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel like we were getting to a place where we have to get. So I canceled it, but we'll do it in the future. Okay. So it looked like Putin was trying everything he could not to be involved, saying we have to deal with the underlying causes first and that sort of thing. And they were parading out these kind of arguments. And so Putin is saying this on one side, and then Trump saying, well, we just canceled. Okay, so everything from Putin's phone call forward just was retarded when they were just making all this progress. And well, here we are. Now, Putin was out stating that the summit with Trump in Budapest is not canceled, but rather postponed. Okay, so again, the strategy is to draw this out as much as possible. And if that's a strategy, okay, well, it's not canceled, it's postponed, we'll get to another day. And he talks about how dialogue is always better than any kind of confrontation, any kind of dispute, or especially war, which is ironic coming from Putin. Now, he also was talking about how Russia's response in the event of Tomahawk strikes against it will be serious, if not staggering. Why is he still talking about Tomahawks? Tomahawks are off the table. Trump even said that he wasn't serious about doing the Tomahawk thing, but Putin's still talking about it, and he's talking about it for a reason. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Okay, with the Budapest summit off, one Russian paper criticizes the capriciousness and fickleness of our main negotiating partner. That's Trump. Plus, investment activity is worsening. Okay, I'm just going to show you the first part of this, not the investment activity. Let's listen for like 20 seconds.
The paper refers to him today after the Budapest summit was put on hold. The paper talks about the capriciousness and fickleness of our main negotiating partner. The Russian government paper Rossiyskaya Gazeta blames the West, or rather Western media. It says Western media carried out a large-scale disinformation campaign designed to derail the summit.
Yeah, it's them. They're trying to derail it. No, it was Moscow trying to derail it. They derailed it, and then Trump went and claimed credit for having canceled it, which Putin says is not canceled. And okay, but Medvedev is, you can count on him to lash out about things, lashing out at the U.S. president. Trump saying the United States is our enemy, and their loquacious peacemaker has now fully taken up the path of war with Russia. Trump's cancellation of the Budapest summit, new sanctions against our country from the United States. What else? Will there be new weapons apart from the notorious Tomahawks? Even he's talking about Tomahawks now, right? Yes, he does not always actively fight on the side of Bandera's Kyiv yet, but this is now his conflict, not that of senile Biden. Of course, they will always say he had no choice, that Congress pressured him, etc. That does not change the main point that the decisions made are an act of war against Russia. And now Trump has fully aligned himself with Mad Europe. That's Medvedev's take. Okay, let's keep going. Kira Rudik, she's a member of parliament in the Verkhovna Rada in Ukraine. She said President Trump canceling the meeting with Putin finally looks like a shift, a sign of real willingness to bring peace through strength, not talks. I'm not so sure about that. I don't think that there's any real meaningful shift here. There is another head fake this way and a head fake that way, and I'm not sure what to make of it yet. Now, the person who is last in Trump's ear seems to sway him. So yesterday, Mark Rutte was there. Today, again, a Russian attack at least seriously wounded children in a kindergarten in Ukraine. This was yesterday he's speaking. So we need to make sure that the air defense systems are in place, and we need the U.S. systems to do that, and the Europeans are paying for that. So the Europeans paying for buying American weapons is going to be music to Trump's ear, and that might be somewhere where they can make some headway. This is exactly the type of actions that we needed, and the president, that's President Trump, is doing that. So Mark Rutte is maybe coaxing him along to provide some of that. Trump channels of Biden claiming that Ukrainians can't have Tomahawks for the same reason that they couldn't have F-16s, and they couldn't have Patriots, and they couldn't have HIMARS, and they couldn't have Abrams tanks, and they couldn't have ATACMS, and it's all because you don't want to escalate. He's using the same playbook. It's really, really weird to watch Trump saying this now because he's talking like Biden. Now, I criticized Biden. I did. I criticized Biden at the time for being pressured by Putin's threats to not like Putin was actually causing Biden not to do these things. I criticized him, rightly so. And I'm criticizing Trump right now, rightly so, for not doing this. And it's not even because he's being deterred by Putin. It's some weirder reason than that. I just can't quite understand why Trump is doing this. So Trump channels Biden, and Branislav Slanchev says Trump is cribbing from Scholz's how to delay military aid for dummies. We've heard all this before about the Patriots, the ATACMS, the F-16s. Ukrainians have mastered each and every system in record time. Yeah, that's right. They have. So, sell it to them, and they'll figure it out in short order. They'll get the training and they'll make it happen. Now, Trump also said this: the only thing I can say is every time I speak with Vladimir, I have good conversations, and then they don't go anywhere. Well, yeah, because it's been this pull the ball out from under you, Charlie Brown kind of moment every time. And it's kind of like he knows, but kind of like he just keeps going down that path anyway. Okay, switching gears a little bit. Zelensky is saying that President Xi told him that he would not sell weapons to Russia. But I know one thing: China is helping Russia. China is not helping Ukraine. China is not interested in our victory and Russia's defeat. That's what Zelensky said at this conference in Brussels. And the Chinese foreign minister is out today after the sanctions, saying China always opposes unilateral sanctions that have no basis in international law and are unauthorized by the UN Security Council, which the Russians chair right now, and the Russians have a veto over, so they wouldn't sanction it. So, okay. And then, but you did see this: Chinese state-owned oil companies have suspended purchases of Russian oil because of those sanctions, at least temporarily. It looks like that might be the case. This is early reporting. Maybe this is wrong, but this is what I'm seeing so far. All of them will refrain from trading Russian seaborne oil, at least in the short term, according to Reuters. If this sticks, it's huge. I'm not optimistic that it's going to stick. Now, Zelensky was also saying that Ukraine relies on its own long-range systems for long-range strikes inside Russia, capable of hitting targets 150 to 3,000 kilometers away. The main issue is funding for mass production. There's actually two issues. One issue is funding. The second is payload. Well, three issues. The second is payload, and the third is how probable is it that the Russians will be able to shoot it down. And Russia's ability to shoot down Ukrainian weapons is far better than Tomahawks, which is why we were talking about Tomahawks. Long-range weapons aren't exclusive to the U.S. They're also in the hands of some European countries, including Tomahawks. So this is Zelensky talking about this today with the Europeans. President Zelensky said at the European Council, we are already in talks with countries that can help. About that, here he is. He's clearly in a good mood, asked about this.
We will see. I don't know, really. Each day brings something. I don't know, maybe tomorrow, I don't know. We will have Tomahawks.
Yeah, maybe tomorrow. Obviously not like tomorrow, but maybe soon they'll be able to get that from European partners. We'll see how that works. It seems more probable than from the Trump administration. Now, yesterday we were talking about, I didn't talk about this, but this was big in the news. The Wall Street Journal posted this video or this article about how the U.S. lifts Kyiv restriction on Ukraine's use of European long-range missiles. Okay, so that was posted, and then shortly thereafter, Trump denied the Wall Street Journal report. This is in the Hill. He even tweeted, put it out on Truth Social. The Wall Street Journal story on the USA's approval of Ukraine being allowed to use long-range missiles deep into Russia is fake news. The U.S. has nothing to do with those missiles, wherever they may come from or whatever Ukraine does with them. Okay, I'm not sure why denying that is going to help force Russia to the table, but he was pretty interested in making that kind of statement. By the way, this was also tweeted out by Kirill Dmitriev about what Donald Trump had said. Like, okay. Now, Michael Weiss pointed this out. Trump's denial of the Wall Street Journal story, read this paragraph twice, transferring authorization from Hegseth to Grinkowicz, that's the NATO guy, is almost the scoop itself. It cuts Elbridge Colby out of the process, and one wonders how and why this decision was taken. So that's a positive step. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a zag yet, but it's still a positive step the right direction. Andrew Perpetua says maybe Trump didn't recently lift restrictions on Ukraine striking Russia, which means he had to have done so in the past, because Biden is the one who made the restriction. So either Trump is telling the truth and he lifted them a long time ago, or he's lying and he lifted them recently. Either way, he lifted them. Anyone who says Trump did not lift the restrictions on Ukraine striking Russia is lying. Yeah, I think that happened. And I would put the date as somewhere between or before August 1st, because that's when the long-range strikes on refineries started hitting. And so maybe there's something to that. I'm just speculating about that particular point. Okay, Russian President Putin ordered nuclear exercises. This was just a couple of days ago before everything was canceled. And then he was making it sound, I know it was the nuclear triad, intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-fired missiles, and cruise missiles. This show of force came as Trump-Putin peace meeting in Budapest was postponed. But it was before they knew that it was postponed. And it was kind of like a show of force to show just how, like, see, this is what we have. Don't mess with us. Okay, now the U.S. military was striking vessels carrying drugs in the Pacific Ocean. Everything else has been on the Atlantic side, the Caribbean. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed the operations. According to him, there were 2 people on board. Both were killed. There's been 7 other incidents about this, so the U.S. is focusing on things like that. Now, what's interesting to me is that Russia seems to be doing something with Venezuela. Polymarket Intel put this out. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro announced the acquisition of 5,000 Russian Igla-S surface-to-air missiles, positioning them to counter U.S. forces deployed in the Caribbean. So Russia's now arming Venezuela for war with the U.S. Is that what's going on? And you can only imagine that Russia would love to have another arming of a country like Venezuela or Cuba or something along those lines. He would be more than happy to do this to put a burr under the U.S. saddle. There's a Russian outlet, VCHK, OGPU that wrote that Russia may be preparing for a much larger war. Their budget already exceeds 8% of GDP. And then when you actually add in the hidden military expenditures, you're looking at more like 12% of GDP. That is more than 260 billion based on 2024 figures, which exceeds Ukraine's entire GDP is what Russia is spending on its military right now. So they have no plans to go anywhere. Just a couple last things and we'll be done. Before we're done, my shout out is to ODDHS, a graduate Patreon viewer. Thank you very much. Let's talk about Orban and what was going on here. Orban, desperate attempt to make Hungarians forget that on this day in 1956, Russians killed between 2,000 and 3,000 people in Budapest. No, he's having this Budapest peace march. And it's we're not going to be involved in any war with Ukraine. That's where the peace march is. But really, on this day in 1956, a fascist revolution of hooligans financed by imperialist West began in Hungary. This meant that the USSR had sent its army on holiday to liberate them from themselves. If he could, Orban would invite our tanks to ensure his reelection. Yeah. 1956. It's like he forgets what the Russians were, which the Russians are. Okay, and before we forget what they are, let's remember this. The brave people of Tbilisi in Georgia now are on their 329th consecutive day of protest against Russia's seizure of their government. Hundreds now sit in prison. Don't forget what's happening. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for you. That was a lot to get through. Thank you for your time and the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.